All right, so let's continue our exploration of JavaScript and Postgres. So here's the code we had before. And now let's imagine this is the back end to some web application. So we're going to have people type stuff into a web form, a form on a web page, and our program's going to process that information. It's not really, we're doing this in our mind's eye. I don't want to add the code to do that just now, just so we get kind of an understanding of the basic Postgres code. But imagine that's what we're trying to do. And to help you with that imagination, I have this little search thing here. Imagine someone's going to type in something like, that's what I want. And then we're going to hit submit there or search, and off it goes. It's going to, our code's going to execute, find that information in the database, like it's rank number 4, it's the artist is Bruno Mars, whatever, and it'll display that to the user. So that's kind of the goal we're going to have, but we're not worrying about how we're connecting this thing to our back-end code. We're just looking at, well, how does it work, kind of the basics of interacting with the database. So that's what we're concerned about, not this bit. So let me get that out of the way so we can worry about what we need to worry about. So instead of that nice web form, I'm just going to have some variable, oops, I'll call user input, and just let's imagine that that person types this in on that form that I showed before. All right, so let's construct a query. I could just add on this row here, but it might get long, so I'm just going to kind of divide things up a bit. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'll call it Q for query, and that equals pretty much what I had there. Select Splat from Hot 100 where, and that's the title, equals, and now I'm going to do JavaScript string concatenation and just say user input. Looks good. And why not print that? Just so we see what that looks like. And then now I'll send that query off to the database server. So I'm going to construct that query here, the Q. Maybe I'll call it Q. I log that query here. I just print that out, what we constructed here, just so we can take a little look at it. And then I'm going to send that off to the database. And then I get some response for the database. I do that await. And then once I get that response, I'll print out the what rows I got back. So that's kind of the, looks pretty good. Let's see if that works. So here I'm printing out the query I'm sending to the database. Notice that I have those nice quotes around the string, which I should have, and I'm doing that because there's that little quote there, and there's the ending quote. And then I get back the response. That looks pretty good. Let's try another one. How about, let's try wild thoughts. Let's search for wild thoughts. Save that. Do a little testing of our code here. That string looked good that we're sending the query, and we're getting nice results back. It was number 2. Let's continue our testing and try that's what I like. Notice that I've surrounded the string with these double quotes, so I don't need to protect this single quote at all. That's just how JavaScript, Python, and other languages work. So it's perfectly fine. And let's see if that works. Let's clear just so we get a fresh start here. And that didn't seem to work. Let's take a look at what query we created here. So here's the query we made. And I can see what happened that was wrong. So I did a select star from Hot 100 where title equals, and then we go from this single quote to the next single quote. So I'm searching for that. And then there's all this gobbledygook at the end that doesn't seem, that wrecks our query. It makes everything fail. So, the single quote here tends to be a problem. And let's illustrate that again before I show you a solution to that. And just give me 1 second to do that. Okay, I think this looks good. Let me just create a new file here and paste stuff in. And so here what I want to do is implement this part where a user is going to enter their username and password, and my code in the back end is going to check to see if that's correct. And so it'll go look and see if there's an entry with that username and password, and if so, I'm just going to print out that entry, and if not, it's going to not find it, so it'll print out an empty list. So that's kind of what my goal is here. So imagine that we're doing the back end for this login feature, and that's what I've sort of implemented here. So this is all the same, this top business. So here I'm pretending that a user typed in and typed in the word password, and that's what we have in the Billboard SQL. So if I look down here, her password really is password. And let's take a look at the query I construct. So, and let me move this a little bit so we can see it a little better. So I do select star from users where username equals, in the same business where I'm doing JavaScript string concatenation. That looks good. And password equals, and again I'm pasting in that variable password1, which comes from here, password1. So that looks good, and I print out the query and I execute that query. So let's save that, maybe, and I'm saving that as I'll call it try.js. All right. Okay, node. And that looks good. So here's that query that I constructed. You see it pasted in and password correctly. Got it from up here and pasted into the query string. So that's the query. And it returns that tuple or the JSON. The username is Ann, the password is password. And let me type in a bad password. Let's say Ann has a dog named Dog. I don't know, I'm not very inventive here. And so we think her password is dog. Let's give that a shot. And so there's our query. It still looks good, but it returns the empty list or empty array. We don't have any entry for that has username Ann and password dog. So this looks pretty good for our test, that if there's something, if we get some answer back, something that's not an empty array, then we know that the person's password is good. And if we get an empty array, we know that the person typed in incorrect password, right? Because if I just go XYZ here, 1, 2, 3, it's not going to find that. And we're going to get that empty string again. So that looks good. But let me try something different. So let's say a user types in, let me get my cursor back, that, which we know is incorrect, or 1 equals, whoops, 1. So now let's see what happens. I'm going to save this. Clear. And now we get a response back, oddly enough, that password XYZ isn't correct, but what we get now, everybody's username, and more interestingly, everybody's password. And let me point out here, which I should have done earlier, is this is definitely not the way to store passwords in the database. And I'll talk about this in an upcoming video. So just bear with me. We're just trying to do things one step at a time. Don't do what I do, I guess, in this video related to how I'm storing passwords in the database. So that said, this looks not a very good thing. This looks like we really screwed up, that a person can type in something in their login feature. Sorry for my delay here. Some username, and if I type the password, you just see this. So imagine they type in that in the password field, or 1 equals 1, and then they can log in. They can log in as anybody. This is called SQL injection. It's really a bad thing, as you can imagine. They can do more than just, log in as anyone. All sorts of havoc can be played. But the good news is there's a fairly easy way to eliminate some of the very basic SQL injection problems. So not everything. There's a lot more to the topic than you would think, but we can do an awful lot with some very simple methods. And let me explain those methods now, and let me get that out of the way. And for that, let me go back to this one here and fix this one. And let me keep this up just so we have a couple samples here. Let me var user input 1 equals. Okay, so we have just a couple to play with at least. And let's fix this. So the problem is, and here I'm illustrating something you should never do, so don't do what I do in this case. You should never use JavaScript concatenation that involves any user input. So anytime a user types something into a web page or something, you shouldn't just concatenate that to a string, because they can type in all sorts of junk. And that's sort of the problem. They can type in, as I showed you here, or 1 equals 1. They can try to exploit our site in numerous ways. And people seem to have lots of extra time where they can do that. Sorry for bopping in and out. So let's fix this. This is not the way to do it. And how we're going to do it is this way, and I'll explain it in a second. I'm going to chuck out this bit and just put in a variable called $1. And I'm going to let the PG adapter, this guy here, pool.query, to insert stuff into the query to replace this, and it'll protect it. It's smart enough that it'll protect us from doing some basic SQL, prevent some basic SQL injection. And in this case, it takes a second argument. It'll be a list, and user input 1 here, and what happens is user input 1, the $1 will be the first element in this list. So if I had 2, 3 here, I would expect 3 things here. 2 maybe. Right, so whatever user input 1 is, Despacito would be replaced here, and then 2 would be the second item. This refers to the second item in the list would be replaced here. The third item in the list, so 3 would be attached there. So that's how we're reading this. $1, the first thing in the list will be, this $1 will be replaced by the first thing in the list. I'm hoping I'm kind of clear there. So let me chuck out all this junk that I just put in, and let's give it a shot here. No, that's not very good, is it? Because I have this 2 and 3 there. And it didn't wreck the original thing. Despacito showed up. That looked fine. And now what I'm going to do is let's try the one that was getting wrecked before, number 2. Whoops, that's not where I'm putting it. User input 2. Okay, and let's give that a shot. Clear this. And that worked too. So we got, before we were getting everything, our program kind of blew up, but now we're getting a nice answer. So it's protecting us from that SQL injection, or protecting us in this case from that apostrophe. So let's go ahead and fix this try.js. So here we have 2 variables. So as you can expect, this one here will be $1. So we'll replace that, and password equals, went a little too far there, $2. Now you might think, and this is a common error people do, that we should have quotes around it, because when we do replacement we need quotes. But it automatically does that. This pool.query will automatically put quotes around stuff, so we don't need them in here. And because we're replacing two things, we have $1 and $2. Here, we're going to have a list of two items. The one is user 1. And let's make a new password, password 2, just so we can make sure it works fine. And that was Anne's correct password. So we have a correct password in this one where someone's trying to do some harm to our site. And this looks reasonable, I suppose. Let's see if this works. So we get a response back. That looked good. So Anne is, with that password, is in our database because we got a row back. Let's try one that we knew was, let's try, I forget what, dog, because that one shouldn't work. And that one doesn't. It returns an empty list. Now let's try the dodgy one, password 1, where someone's trying to do that SQL injection. It's clear here. And we get the empty list, which is correct, is what we're expecting. So we prevented SQL injection here. So this is a really important thing to do, to make sure that you never, ever, ever use JavaScript concatenation on any user input. So you can concatenate stuff all you want if you control what you're concatenating, but anytime some user is typing stuff into a web form, let me bring that, it just doesn't want to scroll here for some reason, but every time you bring that in, allow people to type stuff in, you have to think that they're out to get you. That they might type something in that's kind of wonky, or in the first case, that's what I want. That was a legitimate query and we were failing on it and getting an error. So, you know, that was, the person wasn't being bad, it was just that we didn't account for that. Here, people can do various exploits. So there's a simple fix, and it's to use let the pool.query or let the Postgres adapter do the replacement. That's really the point of this entire video, and I hope it was helpful. So thanks. See you in the next video.